So that recap is going to happen through XR. Why is XR a recap of the other things? Well, that is because the term XR itself, right? It stands for extended reality. And extended reality is a term that acts as an encapsulation for everything else. Basically, it's an umbrella term. AR, VR, MR, they're all a subset of XR. So now, to actually recap what these things were, AR is simply superposition of digital elements on top of physical elements. These digital elements, they can be created using traditional methods. So for example, if it's a 3D model, somebody probably created that 3D model in a software like, Maya, Max, maybe Blender, or any of these softwares. They exported that into a certain type of file. Could be an FBX file, could be the OBJ file. That file is then imported into a software, which can be a game engine or could be something else like maybe Android Studio if the application is being built for Android. Once that model is created inside the engine or the Android Studio application, and then you can create your own functionality, your own code that this is what this application will do. And then that application is shipped out to many different app stores. And again, this is just superposition on top of the physical world, right? Digital element superposition on top of the physical elements. MR is basically AR, but with interaction. So you have superposition and you have interaction. Now, of course, sometimes an MR is not fully possible in phones because you have to have some sort of an equipment that can be interacted with, but there are applications that can make that happen. Depends on the kind of application you're using. So until AR and MR, your equipment has a certain amount of overlap, and depending upon exactly what you're trying to make, if you're trying to make something extremely specific or more of certain kind, there may not be some overlap, and sometimes you may even have to design equipment by scratch so that you can show whatever you're trying to show in your application more specifically, right? You can be more precise about what your objective is, what your intention is. Moving on, VR. We just talked about VR, which is the complete immersion in the virtual world. It sounds a little bit, well, a little awkward to say complete immersion in the virtual world because at the end of the day, you're still sitting in your chair or on your sofa with your VR headsets and your controller. So you're still in the digital world, but you're just not seen anymore. Moving on, XR, as we just talked about, is an umbrella term, and AR, MR, VR are just subsets. So, metaverse. Now, once we have now just discussed what AR, VR, MR are, we are going to go to this term metaverse, which is used quite a bit. You may have seen many people use this term metaverse, but sometimes it is difficult to understand what exactly it means. And I will be very open to admit that many times when people say metaverse, I don't think they mean exactly what metaverse is, because for a long time, metaverse didn't even have a proper definition because this technology, right, it's advancing at a pretty quick rate. Things change almost every month, every week. So these kind of definitions change. But right now, I'll explain about what a metaverse is that it is a 3D space. It's a virtual space, all right? Not in the physical world. It's a digital space that you can exist in as 3D avatars. You can exist in the space using an avatar or using some sort of a representation of yourself. To give an example, I will actually go back a few slides to show you a photo really quickly. So this plane simulation. Imagine that instead of you just simulating your plane, imagine you had a completely open world, right? And you could see other people flying planes as well, just like you're flying your plane in the same open 3D space. Let's just say that there are now more people flying their planes. And then by the definition that we just looked at, this whole space in which all of the people exist together as digital avatars or representations of themselves, it would by definition become a metaverse. Now, the reason why I said that the defining it can be a little bit complex is because it's used in so many different contexts. The term, that is, the term metaverse is used in so many different contexts that it's difficult to keep a track of which is the correct definition of metaverse. And I'll stick to this definition that I just showed you right now. Moving on. And one important thing, I'm so sorry that I skipped this. Important thing is that users exist as 3D avatars that can communicate, right? That is important. So in the example that I gave with planes flying around in one 3D space, if we can communicate with each other through radio, that would be fine. But in other places, we do want to communicate with other people, because if you exist in a 3D space and you can't really interact with others, that's not much use, right? That's the idea of metaverse, that you can exist here like an avatar, which is a representation of yourself. So what I have here are a couple of screenshots, and we'll talk about the top left one first. That screenshot is essentially sort of like a game. There is a game that is not the one that I have a screenshot on, but you may have heard about it. It is called VR Chat. So that is an example of a metaverse. What happens in that game is basically that you have this space, could be like a room where people can play games, like a pool area, maybe it's just a chat room, maybe it's a restaurant location like that, which is completely in digital world, right? It's a 3D restaurant, and people can get into that location as metaverse characters. They can go there, they can sit, they can even order food if the application allows for it. They can talk to other people that are sitting there, and they can have a complete conversation. And that's the first example that I'm giving, right? And as you can see, this is a very entertainment centric example. And it doesn't achieve anything productive. People are just going into a world, they're having a good time, which is not to say that that's not non-productive. Rejuvenation is productive, that's necessary, but the other more productive part of it is meetings. So right now we're talking on Zoom, right? Let's say that for some specific reason, right, for some certain requirement, you want to make it so that instead of just talking through Zoom, you want to be able to see the other people like fully, like a representation of themselves. It could be a meeting, could be a discussion, and that is where the second photo comes into play. Instead of having a meeting on Zoom, you could have a meeting in a metaverse environment where you exist as an avatar, and the screen that's being shared would show up in the actual environment, right? You have a screen right there, and you can see it, that it has the meeting graphs and points that they're talking about on that screen. The merits and the disadvantages of these approaches are something that can be discussed, and I will talk about that and near the end of this presentation. But if you have some ideas, just hold that thought. We will get onto it very quickly. Moving on, virtual production. So this is another application of this technology. So now virtual production isn't exactly AR, VR, MR, or XR. It is a slightly different way of filming. This is completely for films. This is a very up and coming field, right? And the reason why I have this in a slide, which is about AR, VR, MR, and XR, is that some technology used here is kind of same in the sense of their objective. So in VR, as we saw, that our objective is to fully immerse in a world, right? So that you can feel what it's like to be there. The same concept is also used in films. Moving on, I mean, not moving on, but going forward in this slide, here's a question for you. Have you ever seen the TV show on Disney Plus called The Mandalorian? If you have, and if you like it, I request, or I recommend at least, to see the behind the scenes of The Mandalorian, how it was shot, right? They didn't go to certain locations to shoot it. They did not go to certain locations to shoot it. They did what's known as a virtual shoot, right? Here's a screenshot of that. So that's right there, main character. And if you look very carefully behind, right, this giant photo, that is not a photo, that is actually a screen. It's a screen, like a TV screen, like a huge TV screen. You can even see lights at the top. You see those? So it's a giant TV screen that is on the background, and you have some foreground elements. For example, you have this foot, this path that the character is walking on, right? That's actually there. You have an actual wooden path, but the background fully virtual. And where do we get these backgrounds from? It depends. You can either paint them, or what the Mandalorian did is that they created their backgrounds in Unreal Engine. They created their backgrounds in Unreal Engine. And the best part about that is they can change it in real time. Do you know how when you're playing a game, you can use your mouse to look around? You can do the same thing here. Imagine that your monitor is there in the background, and when you move your mouse, right? When you move your mouse, you're basically looking at different aspects of the environment that has been created. That's what you're essentially doing. So, what you're going to do next is you have this environment in which you're shooting, right? And you now can change it at will. Here's how traditional filmmaking works. If you want a scene that is shot in the dark, in the night, you need to take your actors and your entire film crew in an open area where there's actual night, right? You have to shoot at night. But with this, you can just shoot at any given time. All you have to do is create a night scene in Unreal Engine, right? Same for other fields. Like, let's say if you want to shoot behind a certain building, you can just create that building in Unreal Engine, put it on the screen, and you have it right there, right there. And there's another huge advantage of this approach, right? The big advantage, which many actors report, is this. Uh, Look at this photo, right? Now you again have a screen. It's a much smaller screen as compared to the last time. It's a much smaller